I'm Claire Monroe. I'm 32. And last summer, at my husband's family barbecue, I realized something that changed my life. Despite 5 years of marriage to Nathan, I never quite felt like a Caldwell. Not really. Their world was polished, legacy surnames, vacation homes, wine pairings I couldn't pronounce. Mine was quieter, simpler. I never thought that made me lesser, until they treated me like it did. At last year's barbecue, I brought a handmade dessert and tried, once again, to share something about my work, an exhibit I'd helped organize for a local gallery. Melissa, my sister-in-law, swirled her glass and said, with a smirk that didn't even bother hiding the contempt, "If Claire disappeared tomorrow, who would even notice?" The table laughed. Even Nathan chuckled, like it was just harmless teasing. Like it didn't sting. Like I hadn't spent years trying to prove I belonged. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I looked Melissa straight in the eye and said calmly, "Maybe it's time you found out." That night I left. No big exit. No drama. Just packed a single suitcase and disappeared. On my own terms. They thought I'd vanish quietly. But I didn't disappear. I rebuilt. And 1 year later I returned. Not for them. For me, I met Nathan Caldwell when I was 25. I had just been promoted to full-time faculty at the local community college, teaching visual arts, and he was invited to speak on business ethics through some university partnership. He walked into my classroom by accident, actually, confusing one building for another, and ended up staying for the entire lecture on Bauhaus influence in modern typography. He asked more questions than my students did. He was magnetic, polished, polite, but with a quiet kind of charm that made you feel like you mattered when he spoke to you. I was used to artists and free spirits, people who wore their messiness on their sleeves. Nathan was the opposite. Structured. Considered. From the start. He seemed fascinated by the way I saw the world. I thought it was respect. Maybe in the beginning, it was. Our first real conversation happened over coffee 2 days later. He asked to take me out to thank me for letting him stay in the class. But we both knew it wasn't just gratitude. We talked for hours. About everything from color theory to childhood fears. He told me he was in corporate finance, but avoided giving details. I didn't push. I wasn't interested in his bank account. I was interested in him. Things moved fast. Nathan was thoughtful and attentive. He sent flowers for no reason. He asked about my students. He came to my gallery nights. Even if he didn't understand half the pieces. When he asked me to move in with him after 7 months, it felt right. That was the first time I saw the Caldwell name. The apartment was a high-rise overlooking downtown, cold granite counters. Minimalist everything. No plants. No warmth. His parents had bought it for him after grad school. A starter place, he'd called it. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. People grow up differently. I brought color into his space. Books, framed prints, a throw blanket my mom crocheted. He didn't complain. But he didn't exactly celebrate it either. The first time I met his family was at a charity brunch, hosted by his mother, Vivienne. I wore a pressed navy dress and nude heels. Safe, professional. Nathan said I looked beautiful, but when we arrived, Melissa gave me a once-over and said, "How sensible." I didn't know if it was a compliment. I still don't. The Caldwells were intense. Vivienne was all smiles and perfectly styled silver hair, the kind that moved but never frizzled. She spoke to me like I was a guest lecturer, not Nathan's partner. His father, Charles, shook my hand and immediately asked where I did my undergrad. When I said, "State school, then an arts institute for my MFA," he paused like he was processing a mildly inconvenient detail. Melissa was the worst. She had a biting way of phrasing things that always sounded helpful until you replayed it later and realized you'd been insulted. "Oh, you're in the arts? That must be so rewarding. I don't know how you manage without a predictable salary." I laughed it off. Nathan squeezed my hand. We got engaged 2 months after that brunch. His proposal was private and simple. A handwritten letter. A ring passed down from his grandmother. For a moment, It felt like a bridge between our worlds. But the wedding planning told a different story. Vivienne took over instantly. The venue, the guest list, the caterer, she offered to handle it all. So Claire can focus on being present, she said sweetly, like I was a particularly fragile houseplant. When I suggested using a local florist I loved, Melissa said, "Do they even deliver outside the city?" Then she offered her own contact. "She does the governor's parties." I compromised. Again and again. For Nathan. For peace. For the illusion of belonging. My mother cried at the rehearsal dinner. Not because she was moved, but because no one in the Caldwell family had even asked her to say a word. She gave birth to me, raised me through 2 jobs and night classes, and yet she was seated at the back table, beside someone's cousin's intern. After the wedding, Nathan and I settled into a rhythm. I continued teaching. He began climbing faster at his firm. Promotions, bonuses, accolades. I was proud of him, but somewhere in there my world began shrinking. He started traveling more. I picked up more housework. His family events were non-negotiable, mine were optional. When I was offered a curator assistant role at a small modern art museum, my dream track, Nathan hesitated. "It's just a lot of change right now," he'd said. "Maybe next year." I turned it down. Melissa sent us a housewarming gift. When we moved into a larger apartment, a set of sleek, silver salad tongs and a card that read, "Now you can host like a Caldwell." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There were bright spots, of course. Gallery walks with friends. Letters from my former students. But more and more, I found myself editing parts of me out. Swapping bold earrings for pearls, saying, "Interesting," instead of, "I disagree." Smiling when I wanted to scream. I told myself it was worth it, that I was growing, that love meant compromise. But I wasn't growing. I was eroding. Quietly, politely, with every dinner party where I felt invisible. And yet, I still stayed. Until that summer barbecue. Looking back, the first cuts didn't even sting. That's the thing about microaggressions. They're subtle, almost elegant in their cruelty. No shouting. No direct insults. Just 1,000 little nicks that make you question if you're imagining the whole thing. The first happened at brunch. Nathan and I had been married for 6 months. It was the first time Vivienne invited me to one of her ladies' luncheons. I spent the morning choosing an outfit that was feminine, but not flashy. Smart but not threatening. I settled on a powder blue wrap dress I'd worn to one of my own gallery openings. Something that had once made me feel strong. Vivienne greeted me with her usual smile, just short of warmth, and kissed both my cheeks. "I told the others you're an artist," she said as she guided me to the table. "But don't worry." I reassured them, "You're not the dramatic kind." I laughed softly, unsure how to respond. Before I could say anything, Melissa chimed in. Already seated at the head of the table, her fingers wrapped around a mimosa flute. "Of course she's not. Claire's very gentle." She said it like it was a flaw. During the meal, one of the women asked what I did. I told them I taught design and worked part-time as a freelance curator. That's when Melissa struck again. "Oh, so you do this on the side. That's lovely." Like it was a hobby. Like I played with paint between real responsibilities. I smiled, nodded, and let it pass. But inside, something shifted. I wasn't being introduced as Nathan's wife. Or as a professional. I was a pleasant accessory. A soft, unassuming presence who wouldn't challenge their order of things. At another gathering, a cousin asked how we met. When I told her the story, she laughed and said, "Wow, that's very Hallmark. I guess sometimes the real world does blend with fiction." I didn't tell Nathan. Or rather, I tried. But every time I brought up these comments, he'd say, "You're reading into it. That's just how Melissa is. They mean well." Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But either way, I started adjusting myself in advance, to avoid giving them anything to twist. I wore more neutrals. I stopped referencing my student projects. I replaced framed prints of my abstract work with minimalist decor. I stopped inviting them to gallery nights altogether. One afternoon, I overheard Vivienne on the phone in the hallway while I was helping her organize her charity silent auction. "No. Claire's not working full-time right now. She's being supportive while Nathan prepares for promotion. She's lovely, very domestic. One of those calm types." I stood there frozen, holding a stack of RSVP cards, suddenly unsure what version of myself she was describing. Certainly not the woman who'd once stood before a room full of strangers explaining how art destabilizes comfort zones. It wasn't all venom, of course. Sometimes it was sugar sweet, which made it worse. On our first Christmas as a married couple, I painted a custom portrait of Nathan's childhood home as a gift for his parents. It took me weeks. I framed it carefully, wrapped it in gold foil, and placed it under the tree. When Vivienne opened it, she gasped. But not the good kind. "Oh, you painted this?" she asked, blinking. "I did," I said. "Nathan mentioned you missed the old house, so I thought." "How thoughtful," she said, cutting me off. "Melissa, didn't you commission something similar for the upstairs study?" Melissa smiled, eyes gleaming. "Yes, from that gallery in the Hamptons. Remember? The one that features trained professionals." I held my smile. I didn't unwrap the wine glasses I brought for her later that evening. I left them in the car. But the moment that hit hardest was small. So small I almost convinced myself it didn't matter. It was a family dinner. Nothing fancy. Just a Sunday night at the Caldwell house. Roast chicken, white tablecloth, crystal water pitchers. Melissa had brought a friend. A fellow marketing exec from New York. They were discussing some new campaign and the use of vintage aesthetics. That's when I spoke up, casually. Vintage trends often resurface during cultural instability. It's a subconscious way of anchoring identity. Melissa blinked. Her friend turned to her. "That's an interesting point." Melissa smiled sweetly. "Yes. Claire reads a lot of blogs." I was stunned. It wasn't true. I'd taught this very topic. But the way she said it, the calm dismissal, made me feel like a teenager who'd interrupted the adults. I said nothing. But later, in the car, I told Nathan it bothered me. "She always finds a way to make me smaller," I said. He sighed and kept his eyes on the road. "Claire, it's just her humor. You're taking it too seriously. You know she's threatened by how much Dad respects your eye for design." That was the first time he admitted she might have motives. But it wasn't enough. He never confronted her. Never set boundaries. Never once said, "That's not okay." Instead, he asked me to be the bigger person. So I tried. Again. At Melissa's birthday party, I complimented her speech. At Easter, I helped coordinate Vivienne's floral arrangements, and didn't say a word when she told guests. "Claire has such good taste. For someone who didn't grow up around this." I learned to hide hurt behind politeness, to accept micro-injuries as a kind of tax for being part of their world. Until one day, I realized I hadn't created anything for myself in months. No sketchbooks. No color palettes. No clay. Just errands, logistics, holiday planning, table settings, and the quiet hollowing that comes from being smiled at while being erased. But still, I stayed. Because even if the comments stung, even if the silence was heavy, I told myself this was what love looked like: effort. Compromise. Patience. I just didn't realize I was the only one compromising. I found out I was pregnant in early spring. It was a Thursday morning. The test blinked back 2 lines. Clear as daylight. I stood in the bathroom barefoot, heartbeat thundering, one hand over my stomach, as if that gesture alone could offer protection. Nathan was in San Francisco for a week-long conference. I called him, voice trembling. Not with fear, but with joy. We hadn't been trying, but we weren't exactly preventing either. I thought he'd be excited. He paused. "Oh," he said. "Wow. Okay, that was it?" He said all the right words after that. Asked how I was feeling, reminded me to take my vitamins, told me he'd call again before bed. But I could hear it. That static between sentences. The weight of this wasn't supposed to happen now. I didn't let it touch me. Not yet. Instead, I clutched the news close like a secret star. I dreamed of names. I sketched nursery ideas. I imagined a soft, new beginning, something that belonged to just us, something that couldn't be polished or repackaged to fit the Caldwell mold. Nathan returned 3 days later. He brought flowers. Tulips, my favorite. But when I placed his hand on my belly, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "We're going to figure this out," he said. Not, "We're going to be amazing parents." Not, "I'm so happy." Just, "Figure it out." Still, I pressed on. We scheduled the first appointment. I adjusted my diet. I stopped drinking coffee. I canceled a weekend retreat with my old art students. Not because anyone told me to, but because I thought this was the priority now. Vivienne found out through Nathan. I never got to tell her myself. The next time we met, she simply touched my elbow lightly and said, "I do hope you're ready." The Caldwell name comes with certain expectations. Then Melissa chimed in, breezing past with her ever-present iced latte. "Let's just hope the kid gets Nathan's side of the family's bone structure." They laughed. I didn't. The only person who seemed genuinely thrilled was my mother. She called every other day. She knitted baby socks. She asked what names we were considering and read articles about creative parenting. I wanted her near, but she lived 3 states away and couldn't take time off just yet. "Once you hit the second trimester," she promised, "I'll be there." I never made it that far. 11 weeks and 4 days. That's how long I carried hope inside me. It started as a dull cramp. I told myself it was normal. I lit a candle. I drank warm water. I watched paint drying time lapse videos on YouTube to distract myself. But then the pain sharpened, like something tearing slowly from the inside out. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, knees pulled to my chest, whispering, "Not now, please not this, please." Nathan was in Chicago. Another conference. I called his hotel. He answered, groggy from jet lag. "I think I'm losing it," I said. My voice sounded far away, even to me. He paused. Should I come back? I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but nothing came. "Claire," he asked again. "I mean, are you sure? Sometimes this stuff happens, but it turns out okay." I closed my eyes. "I'll manage." "Okay," he said. "Call me if anything changes." He hung up. That night, I bled alone. For hours. I don't remember the pain as much as the stillness afterward. My body had gone from sacred to discarded in the span of one evening. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was punishing. I didn't sleep. The next morning, a bouquet arrived. White lilies. A card signed, "Perhaps it's for the best. Vivienne." I stared at the note for a full minute before tearing it in half. Melissa didn't call. But she did text. "Stress is never good for early pregnancy. You've been overworking. Hope you rest now." As if my grief was caused by ambition, I wanted to scream, throw my phone across the room, burn the house down. Instead, I called my mother. She was on a flight 6 hours later. When she arrived, she didn't ask questions. She unpacked soup, folded my laundry, brushed my hair. We sat on the couch in complete silence, hands clasped, as the sun dipped below the window pane. And for the first time in days I cried. She stayed for 5 nights. And in those 5 nights, I remembered what care looked like. It didn't look like a card with clipped condolences. It didn't sound like a lecture disguised as concern. It looked like someone wiping your face without flinching. Someone holding space for your heartbreak without rushing you past it. Nathan returned on day 6. He brought takeout and an apology. I should have been here. But by then, the damage was already done. It wasn't just the loss of the pregnancy, it was the realization that in my most vulnerable moment, I'd been alone. Not by fate, but by design. His family didn't see me. Not truly. Not ever. They saw a placeholder. A polite, pretty adjunct in their dynasty of curated perfection. And I was exhausted. I began to pull away after that. Not outwardly. On the surface, nothing changed. I still showed up to dinners. I still sent thank you notes. I still smiled at Melissa's backhanded jabs. But something in me had broken. And I didn't have the energy to pretend anymore. One night, Nathan asked me if I wanted to try again soon. I looked at him for a long time before answering. I don't even know if I want to be here again. Nathan. He blinked. Hair where? In this marriage. In this house. In this performance. He didn't know what to say. Neither did I. So we went to bed. In silence. Like strangers. Like survivors of different storms who no longer recognized the language in each other's eyes. 3 weeks later, I started putting together a plan. Quietly, systematically, without emotion. Because I knew now, the love I had given so freely had become invisible currency. Spent, dismissed, taken for granted, and I was done being collateral damage in someone else's fairy tale. It started with a password. Nathan had always managed our shared accounts. Utilities, rent, and subscriptions. It wasn't a matter of control, just habit. But one night, after he'd fallen asleep beside me, I opened my laptop and created a spreadsheet. Tab 1 Financials, Tab 20 Logistics, Tab 30 Essentials. I didn't know exactly what I was planning at first. Only that I needed something. Space. Air. A life outside the heavy curtain of being Mrs. Caldwell. That week, I opened a personal bank account at a credit union near campus. Under my maiden name. I started paying attention to what was mine and what was shared. I canceled my gym membership under his family's account and quietly rejoined the YMCA 2 neighborhoods over. I didn't make a dramatic shift. I just started detaching, one thread at a time. Jade, my closest friend from grad school, lived in Portland now. We hadn't spoken regularly in over a year, but I messaged her one night. You ever wish you could just disappear and start over? She responded within minutes. Yes. Do it. I've got a pull-out couch and zero judgment. We FaceTimed the next morning. Her hair was still wild and blue, her kitchen still messy, and her laugh still the same chaotic comfort it had always been. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Tell me when. I'll be there." I gave myself a deadline. 4 weeks. 4 weeks to unspool the life I'd spent 5 years constructing around everyone else's expectations. I started sorting my belongings by necessity, not sentiment. I sold furniture on Facebook Marketplace under a fake name. I packed art supplies I hadn't touched in months, but still couldn't let go of. I backed up all my teaching materials and deleted any document that tied me to the Caldwell estate or name. Nathan didn't notice, or maybe he did and chose not to ask. We were ghosts in our own home. We talked logistics, groceries, car maintenance, upcoming events, but never feelings. He slept beside me, but we were always miles apart. 3 days before I left, I mailed a letter to my mother. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. I'm safe. I'm choosing myself. I'll reach out once I'm ready to talk more. I love you. The night before, I stood in front of our wedding photo, the one Vivienne had insisted be taken on the lawn of the country club. We looked perfect in that picture. Timeless. Elegant. I reached out and touched the frame, then turned it face down. At 4:00 a.m., I slipped out the front door with a duffel bag, a box of sketches, and a car half filled with the quiet pieces of who I used to be. No note. No confrontation. Just silence. The drive to Portland was long and unremarkable. I stopped for gas, listened to old playlists, and stared at the road ahead like it might split open and reveal a new version of myself waiting at the end. When I arrived at Jade's apartment, she was waiting outside in pajamas and flip-flops. She pulled me into a hug so tight, I felt something in my chest unclench. You did it, she whispered. You really did it. The first week was strange, not painful, not freeing, just strange. I kept expecting someone to call, to yell, to demand an explanation. But there was nothing. Just 3 unread messages from Nathan that said, "Where are you? Are you okay? Want need to talk?" And then silence. Jade gave me space. She didn't pry. She let me sleep, eat, cry, not cry. She left tea outside the guest room door in the mornings and encouraged me to take walks around the block when I looked too pale. By week 2, I started drawing again. Not for anyone, not for social media, not for gallery applications, just lines on paper, smudges. Release. Jade worked from home. And one afternoon, while I was sketching at the dining table, she looked up from her laptop and said, "You look more like you now." I didn't ask what she meant. I knew. By week 3, I began looking at job boards. Not in finance, not in education, but in arts admin, creative co-ops, and local community centers. Not full-time. Just enough to feel useful again. Portland was a different rhythm. Quieter. Messier. Kinder. People didn't care where I went to school or what firm my husband worked for. They cared about who I was becoming. I got a part-time gig helping curate a youth mural project. The kids didn't know my past. They just liked my pencil work and how I let them mix paint with their hands. It was the first time I laughed, really laughed, in months. One evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. It was Vivienne. "Claire, I'm not sure what's going on. But please, don't let this become bigger than it needs to be. We can fix this. Families have miscommunications all the time. Call me." I stared at the screen for a full minute. Then I deleted the message. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't want to be pulled back into a conversation where my value was negotiable. The following week, I wrote Nathan a letter. Not emotional, not cruel. Just facts. I told him I was safe. That I wasn't ready to talk. That I needed space. That I was not disappearing out of spite, but out of survival. I ended with, "I spent years trying to shrink myself to fit your world. I'm finally trying to grow back into mine." Then I mailed it and blocked his number. There was no big explosion. No war. No screaming. Just release. One thread at a time, I'd pulled myself free. And in doing so, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Not silence. Not sadness. Just the quiet, steady hum of becoming. 6 months passed. By then, my name was no longer whispered in the Caldwell household. Or maybe it still was. But only in the way people mention ghosts in brightly lit rooms, hoping they won't appear if you don't say their name too loudly. In Portland, I had found rhythm again. I wasn't fixed. But I was fuller. I had rented a modest studio apartment. Creaky floors, yellow light. Walls I could hang my work on without asking permission. I had 3 freelance contracts, 1 recurring mural project, and a class of 12 high school students who called me Miss C and argued over brush sizes like they were sacred relics. I was alive again. And then, the email came. From an agency called Mather and Sage, known for their socially conscious art collaborations. They were partnering with the Caldwell Foundation for a national awareness campaign on mental health in youth. And they were looking for a lead visual artist. I reread the message 4 times. It wasn't addressed to Claire Caldwell. It was addressed to Claire Monroe. They'd seen my work from the community project I helped lead last fall. Photos had gone mildly viral for their raw, emotive content. The campaign director wanted me involved. There was a stipend, travel included, creative control. Within thematic alignment, I stared at the screen for over an hour. This couldn't be a trap. It was real. It was earned. And it was tied, unknowingly, to the very family that had once erased me. I thought about saying no. But something in me whispered, "Don't hide. Don't shrink again." So I said yes. 3 weeks later, I was on a flight to San Diego for the campaign launch. The event was a full-scale fundraising gala, complete with press coverage, formal wear, and keynote speeches. I wasn't the center of attention, just one of the contributors. But my work was. 3 large-scale mixed-media panels are centered in the main hall. My students' voices are woven into the background texture. Words like unseen, too quiet, and why didn't anyone ask, stitched into the fabric. Faces painted half in shadow, half in color. It was the most vulnerable thing I'd ever created. And it was about people like me. People who had disappeared in plain sight. The afternoon before the gala, The coordinator handed me a printed program to review. I flipped through quickly, until I saw the name Melissa Caldwell. Executive Director, the Caldwell Foundation. And beneath it, Vivienne Caldwell, Legacy Chairwoman. Of course. This was their foundation. Of course they'd be there. Of course they had no idea I'd be standing in front of the work they'd unintentionally sponsored. That night, I barely slept. But I didn't cancel. I chose my outfit with intention. A tailored navy jumpsuit, silver cuff bracelet, a necklace with a single painted ceramic bed I'd made myself. Clean, confident. Me. When I arrived at the venue, no one recognized me. I moved through the crowd like a thread pulled loose. No longer part of the fabric but still present. I stood beside my panels, answering questions from curious guests, watching as art critics jotted notes, and attendees murmured to each other. And then I felt it, that change in air pressure, that subtle hush. They had arrived, Vivienne, Melissa, and, yes, Nathan. He looked smaller, not physically, but in presence. Like someone who'd aged inward. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, his hair slightly longer than I remembered. Melissa wore red, bold, polished, unshaken. Vivienne was ageless, as always, her expression composed and unreadable. They moved through the room, accepting greetings and posing for photos. They hadn't seen me yet. Until they reached the panels. I turned slowly. Nathan saw me first. His expression froze. His mouth opened slightly. Then closed again. Vivienne followed his gaze. Melissa was the last. Silence fell between us. I nodded once. Hello. Melissa stepped forward, her tone tight. Claire. I wasn't aware you were involved in this. I'm one of the featured artists. I replied calmly. My name's on the program. She glanced down at the booklet, her fingers gripping the edge. I didn't realize you'd stayed in the arts. I never left, I said. I just stopped performing it for approval. Vivienne cleared her throat softly. The work is powerful. Her voice was neutral, measured. I'm glad it moved you, I said. Nathan hadn't spoken. His eyes stayed on me soft, searching. May I? He asked, motioning toward the panel. Of course, I replied. He stepped closer. Reading the text beneath the first portrait, one of a young girl painted in watercolor washes, her face turned away. Sometimes I sat at the table and wondered if they'd notice if I left. He looked back at me. Is this about? Yes. I interrupted. But not just about me? He nodded slowly. I'm sorry. I believed him. And I didn't need it. Melissa was the one who lingered. She stared at the final piece, the only one with a full face. A woman, head held high, eyes closed, lips gently parted in a half smile. I disappeared. The caption read. And became more visible than ever. Melissa's jaw tightened. That's clever. It's the truth, I said. She looked at me then, really looked. For the first time, perhaps. I didn't think you had this in you. You never bothered to find out. Later that evening, after the formal speeches and applause, I stood alone near the refreshment table, sipping sparkling water. Nathan approached. Claire? I'm not coming back, I said gently. He nodded. I figured. I just wanted you to know I see it now. All of it. I met his eyes. I hope you grow from it. I'm trying. He paused. Do you hate us? No, I said. I just stopped needing you to see me in order to see myself. He smiled sadly. I wish I'd met this version of you earlier. I was always here, I replied. You just weren't looking. That night, I walked out of the gala into the cool sea air, heels in one hand, art portfolio in the other. Not triumphant. Not bitter. Just full. Full of silence that didn't hurt. Full of peace that wasn't performative. The woman they dismissed had returned. Not to reclaim a place at their table, but to build her own. 2 months after the gala, I closed on a small home in North Portland. It wasn't impressive by Caldwell standards. No marble countertops, no security gate. The backyard was mostly moss and potential. But it had light. It had a crooked front step. And when I opened the windows, I could hear birds, not traffic. It felt like mine. I signed the final paperwork on a rainy Thursday morning, then drove home with a bag of groceries and a fresh bouquet of eucalyptus. I arranged it in a chipped ceramic vase, one I'd made during college. The first thing I unpacked. That night, I slept with the windows open and didn't dream of anyone I used to know. I didn't speak to Nathan again. Not because I hated him, but because there was nothing left that needed to be said. The divorce was finalized quietly, cleanly. He kept the condo. I took the car and the ring from his grandmother, not the one Vivienne had picked, but the original one he gave me during our private engagement. I didn't wear it. I just wanted it because it had once meant something to me. Melissa sent me one email after the gala. "Your work was well received. I underestimated you. That won't happen again." No apology, just a note of reluctant respect. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Vivienne never reached out, but I saw, in an online article, that the Caldwell Foundation was now allocating more of its budget toward youth-led community projects. Specifically in the arts. I smiled, not because I took credit, but because the ripple had started. Jade and I met for lunch once a week. Her new girlfriend adored ceramics, so I started teaching weekend workshops from my studio space. My students painted wild, messy things. I encouraged them to break the rules, layer over mistakes, and keep painting until they recognized themselves. One of them, a teenage boy who rarely spoke, once handed me a painting that was nothing but streaks of black and orange. On the back, he'd written, "I thought I was invisible." This helped me scream without noise. I kept that painting on my fridge. My mother visited twice in the spring. She cried the first time she saw my house. "Because I've never seen you this light," she said. "I'm not light," I told her. "I'm solid now." She nodded, understanding in that way mothers do when words are just placeholders for 1,000 layered feelings. I started dating again. Slowly. Carefully. Not with a checklist, but with curiosity. No one quite stuck. But that was okay. I wasn't looking to fill a void. I was looking to share something I'd rebuilt with too much care to risk crumbling again. Most days, I was alone, and that didn't scare me anymore. One Saturday, I stopped by the farmer's market downtown. I was carrying 3 bundles of beets, debating which coffee stall to try when I saw her. Melissa. She stood across the aisle, browsing artisan cheese. Her hair was tied back in a silk scarf. She looked tired, but softer. Her posture was less perfect. Her hand rested gently on her belly. She was pregnant. Our eyes met. We didn't flinch. She walked over slowly. "Claire," she said, like a question. I nodded. "Melissa." A pause. "I didn't know you shopped here." "Every Saturday," I said. "They have the best heirloom tomatoes in the city?" She smiled, small, surprised. "I'll have to try them." Another pause. Then, without warning, she said, "I've been thinking about what you said at the gala, about disappearing." Her hand moved to her stomach. "I don't want my child to grow up in a house where people feel like they have to vanish to be seen." I didn't answer right away, because that was a sentence I never expected from her. "I'm still learning," she added. "I started therapy." Charlotte pushed me into it. I laughed softly. Charlotte's good at pushing. "She is." Silence again. But not tense. Just quiet. We didn't pretend to be friends. We didn't rehash the past. We just stood there, 2 women with history, in the middle of a market where no one knew what we used to be to each other. "Finally," I said. "That's a good place to start." She nodded. Then he turned, walked away, and disappeared into the crowd. Not like someone retreating, but like someone thinking. On the 1-year anniversary of the day I left Nathan, I stood on my porch with a cup of tea and a blank canvas on the easel beside me. I didn't need to paint anything that day. I just wanted to be. To remember. To reclaim. To honor the girl who once raised a hot dog at a picnic table and said, "Maybe it's time you found out." She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't hurt. She was whole. And she wasn't going anywhere.